I could start with some introductions. So my name is Whistle. I'm a Overwatch coach. I have experience at the tier 3 level, several years of it, and then some experience at the tier 2. To explain that to people who don't know the scene, wait, I didn't click fucking record. We're gonna try this again.
Okay, no
God
problem.
damn it! All right, we try again. Um, so, my name is Whistle, and I have experience coaching Overwatch at the Tier 3 level for a few years, and I also have some Tier 2 experience. Tier 3 basically means the very top of amateur, right? So you're not signed to a team, you're not, you aren't in like the big leagues yet, but like you're pretty damn close. That's basically what Tier 3 means, and then Tier 2 is actual semi-professional play. So I have experience in both of those, mainly in Tier 3. And Hypno? Or fucking whatever I need to call you.
Hypno or Habib is they're both okay.
Habib.
Is it my turn to do an introduction?
Yes.
Oh, okay. So I am a considered top OSU player. That is a rhythm game, PC free rhythm game. You've maybe heard of it as an aim trainer, but basically it is a game where there's music playing and then there are circles placed to the beat of those of the song, right? And then you have to click the circles accurately. Very simple premise, but it gets very complicated very fast. And I have been a competitive tournament player since 2017, playing in the World Cup for the United States for 4 of the last 5 years, in which we won 3 times and then got second place, but that one we don't talk about. And
Oof.
been coaching for the last year or so, I guess, since last February of 2021. Yeah, so yeah, I think in
Year
this
and a half almost.
yeah, I think in this interview slash podcast slash conversation, we are just going to be talking about sort of the differences between coaching in a solo game like Osu versus something as complex and elaborate and team oriented as Overwatch, sort of the differences in maybe philosophy or things like that. But yeah, Whistle, did you have any sort of starting topics to start us off?
I guess the starting is just kind of I wanna know what it's like to coach something so mechanical, right? Because I do a whole lot of coaching, but most of it comes down to strategies, right? Things like very little does it come down to things like actual aim, right? It's a
Right.
lot more teaching bigger like concepts as to how a super complicated game like Overwatch works. Osu. Osu. I actually did play Osu a lot a long time ago. And it's like it seems like it's beauty and simplicity, but it's also because it's so simple. I struggle to grasp exactly how much, exactly what a coach kind of does
Right.
for Osu. So I'm very interested to hear that.
So I think in a game like Overwatch, and I guess most games, to be honest, there's macro and micro, right? Macro being your game sense and general awareness of what is happening from a strategy perspective, and then micro is sort of your game mechanics, like raw aiming
Definitely.
ability, things like that. Ability to do combos correctly.
Hmm.
Um, where if you imagine a hypothetical game where it's only micro, um, some players that play other games will probably be very ecstatic about stuff like that. Um, I remember when I played League pretty actively before O2, and I very much preferred the micro aspect of the game. So that may have been an early sign that I would end up just being an O2 player instead. But um, yeah, from a coaching perspective, I think with micro, if you're only thinking about micro, although I think this probably applies for macro as well, I think improvement really stems from balancing your like fundamentals slash technique versus your actual like skill cap slash like mechanical like maximum ability. Um, and so a lot of I think what coaching revolves around is like being able to well, first of all, being able to diagnose like what that player is like good and bad at basically, and then from there being able to figure out like if yeah, basically like what their main deficits are and like given their goals with the game, like how they can best focus on that. Um, yeah. Let me think. So there's also okay. So specifically regarding OSU, I think just to give a bit more context, there's basically three main aspects that go into playing the game. There's so how the game works is you move your cursor to a circle and then you click on it. Obviously, that also involves figuring out where the circle is and like when you have to click on it. So there's basically three main aspects. There's the aiming aspect, there's the clicking or what's known as tapping aspect, and then there's the reading aspect, which is actually figuring out where the circles are. And then I would say each of those basically have their own like um, fundamental slash technique side of it, and then there's also the mechanical slash like maximum capability aspect of it. So yeah, that's really the micro aspect and the sort of a top level view of how that works. But going back to the whole like a game with absolutely no macro, more or less, um, I think it depends on if you're coaching about specifically tournaments, which I think is where games like Osu and Overwatch are more comparable, where you're actually sort of like working with other players. Um, although I think you can compare. Okay, so Overwatch is much more like most other team sports. I think the quote unquote team sport that Osu tournaments are most comparable to is synchronized swimming or any sort of activity where each individual player is performing by themselves, and yet the performance is basically judged based on like how well you were all collectively able to do the same thing as accurately as possible without interacting with each other. So yeah, I think that's really where the like I guess that's where some macro starts to play a role basically, and specifically about like what strategy could there possibly be in an OSU tournament. So since OSU is a solo game, obviously there's team tournaments, but then there's also solo or 1v1 tournaments. And I think that's really where there's the biggest difference in like what type of player you are. So the best way I can put this is that the amount of different types of okay, let me think. Okay, let me explain a couple terms because I think OSU vocabulary can get kind of crazy. But basically, the songs each have a level to them, basically, which is like the circles that are placed throughout the entire song. Those are called maps or beat maps, but maps for short. And so the amount of types of different maps and like patterns of how the circles can be arranged is about as diverse as the diversity of like the types of music that even exist at all. And if you think about the wide range of music all the way from like different genres to like noise that for some reason people want to classify as music, then you can sort of imagine how, especially as you get to like harder difficulties of OSU stuff, that um, maps get very, very diverse. So, I mean, just a couple sort of categories of like ways that difficulty can be changed in OSU. It's basically the circles can be really, really small, for example. They can appear really, really fast. And so you have to be able to basically react or like process everything in time. They could also be really slow, which if you have so many circles on the screen, then it's really a matter of like not getting lost. And there's also very, very wide spacing where you have to really focus on aiming to everything properly. And then there's really fast tapping where self-explanatory, okay. Um, and then there's sort of everything in between when it comes to complexity, like maybe like really weird rhythms, or we call it finger control, where it's basically you have to, yeah, control your fingers basically with like really weird rhythms. Um, so sort of all those sorts of things combined. And as a player, you sort of reach a point when you're very, very new to the game, obviously you're sort of just figuring out the mechanics and how things work, which I think is probably the same for every game. But then like you sort of reach a certain point where you start to sort of start to specialize in maybe one or two or a couple certain skills. And when we talk from a tournament perspective, that starts to get kind of I think that that's where it really starts to get important, because if you are very specialized in one specific skill, then okay, okay, hold that thought. I think now talk a little bit about how tournaments, or I guess like what makes a good tournament team and like how team tournaments work in OSU. So basically, okay, so if we compare it back to synchronized swimming, basically you So the most traditional team format is where it's 4 players versus 4. So basically, there's in the tournament rules, or the organizers will put out a list of like 20-ish songs that you can pick from that are designed to basically have a little bit of everything when it comes to different skills and things like that. So it's basically a list of maps that the players can pick from that if I feel like I'm better than my opponent at circles that are really far away or like aim heavy stuff, then I will have a couple maps in that list that I can pick and sort of try to get a better score than my opponent, basically. Which scoring is, I don't know, it's a little complicated to explain how exactly it works, but it does a pretty good job of like if you perform better, then you probably win the map. So
I can give like the simplest rundown. Just like if you get a higher combo, which is like things hit in a row, like the higher your combo, the higher your score goes, right? Because
right,
that's how tournaments are scored, right?
right,
Not
that's
not
true.
based on
So
PV.
scoring is basically a measure of two um, variables, basically. So there's your combo, which is basically how many notes in a row that you've hit without missing any, and that's basically a multiplier to your score. And then there's also an accuracy component, which is the timing. So you have to basically click the circles accurately in time with the music. That's kind of the premise of the game. But if you tap them slightly off, then you get slightly lower accuracy, obviously. And so that combined with your combos that you've held throughout the map will basically determine your score. So if you're able to miss less, then chances are you got a higher combo and hopefully higher accuracy as well. And so then you would most likely win that map. So that's how scoring works. And so basically, in a team tournament where it's 4 versus 4, or really any team tournament, even if it's 2v2, 3v3, or there's been some like 8 versus 8 tournaments as well. But basically, for each team, everyone's scores get added up, and then whichever team had the most points by the end of the map wins. Right. So when it comes to team formation, or I guess like strategy, or like rules of players on tournaments, so let's say, okay, so the list of maps that's given, called a map pool, is like the list of maps that the organizers give out that you can pick from during the match. It's designed to have a little bit of everything. And so when you're making a team, okay, I think the most important thing to mention is that it's 4 versus 4, but your team size is allowed to be up to 8. So for any given map, there are 4 players on the team that will not go in. And so basically what that results in is you want at least 4 players that are very strong at any given skill. But if you have more than that, then it's kind of like wasted resources on the team. So if you combine that with the fact that like most players end up specializing in at least a couple skills, or basically have strengths and weaknesses in their micro abilities, then you can sort of see how like there is actually quite a lot of value in being very specialized or having a very linear skill set, it's called, in one skill, if that skill is relatively uncommon. Because if you, let me think of how to put this. If you have a very linear skill set, then you would think that you don't have that much to offer on a tournament team, or in a tournament match in general, because like on probably 80% of the maps, you're just going to get owned. But
But at least having one map where you're good is like most important, right?
right, if you're able to be good at something that the vast majority of players are very bad at, then
Mm-hmm.
you'll still have a pretty reliable spot on a team, because you can just go in for that one map, or maybe like 2 or 3 maps, and like stay
Mm-hmm.
out for the rest of them. Um, and there's very stark contrast between that and solo tournaments, 1v1 tournaments, where if you have any weakness at all, then you are just going to get punished for that, basically. And so solo tournaments really reward like having a very well-rounded skill set and
Right.
yeah, well-roundedness, basically. Whereas like team tournaments, obviously it helps to have some like well-rounded players, but it's also definitely okay to like be very specialized in a team tournament, and like you won't really, nothing bad will really happen. There's also a sort of balance between like, usually if you sort of like spread yourself out between many different skill sets, then it's common to sort of like be like 1 mile wide, 1 inch deep, so to speak, where like,
Right. Makes sense.
so with that in mind, it's sort of tricky to
So
balance.
team building is a big thing, is basically what you're saying.
Right, right. And the other thing I think that's really different between OSU and pretty much every other like esport type game, is that like there are no orgs, there's no like
Yeah.
established teams. Basically, how tournaments work is the tournament gets posted typically on the OSU forums, which is basically the most official place to find where tournaments are hosted. And there is a sign up form, most likely a Google form, and you just sort of put in whatever players you want to play with, and then that's basically it. You're registered for the tournament.
So it's almost like a draft system over anything else.
Well, it's kind of like, okay. So another thing about OSU is like it's a game that is run pretty much pretty much thrives only on its community. It's a very community driven game. There's no
Right.
like every single map was created by someone within the community. Um,
Yeah.
like
Yeah, definitely.
there's no like quote unquote like there's a dev team obviously that codes the game, but aside from that, um, yeah. So with that in mind, let me think. I don't remember what I was saying.
Well, it's all right. If you keep talking, I'm gonna run out of questions. Do you mind if
Oh,
I kind of steer us in a different direction?
oh yeah, yeah,
You're
sure.
going crazy.
Sorry, I think
um,
hopefully that gave like a
yeah,
overview of the game for anyone who is not super familiar.
yeah. I definitely learned some stuff because I did used to know Osu, but I haven't known that much. So that's really cool. A big question I have is like, so you kind of talked about how like it's a lot more on the individual level. And by the way, I just want to say synchronized swimming was a really good like analogy. I think that
Oh,
that's like a really good way to understand it.
I'm glad.
Um,
Yeah, I think so too.
but like, you know, when you're playing as a team, like, does team building actually go into it? Like, is there like team building stuff that you have to do? Because like, at least for me, the only thing that I could see is like maybe some people struggle to cope with the fact that they can only play for a few instead of playing for almost the whole tournament. Like, are there any like team building things that actually go into an OSU team, or is it kind of just getting the individuals like up to where they need to be and then figuring out who plays what?
So when you say team building, do you mean like actually forming the team or like team bonding?
Yeah, I was muted. I mean, like team bonding, right? So like team bonding exercises, making them spend time together and stuff.
Ah,
So like for me, I make teams watch movies together. I have
right.
like exercises where like, I'll pair up two players and they have to say like, oh, I want to do this week, right? And they have to make sure each other do the thing that they said they would. Um, just things like that, right? Things that bring the team together. Is that something that's like a necessary thing that you have to do for an OSU team, or is that more of an optional thing, or it's like not even done really at all?
Okay, so that question reminded me of my train of thought that I lost earlier, which is that like since the game is so community driven, people mostly know like it's very easy to make friends within the community as opposed to like you queue up, you get random teammates, and then you win or lose, and you just kind of queue up again. Um, like since it's so community driven, you sort of like can make friends very easily compared to other games, I guess. And so like most likely, basically in team tournaments, you sign up with people you already know, like your friends. Um, and if not, then at the very least, you sort of like so throughout the week, basically you not really scrim, but you practice together the maps that are in the map pool. So basically, the map pool is given to you the week before matches, and then matches are pretty much always on weekends. So yeah, but aside from that, yeah, I mean, I can even talk about like the World Cup, for example, because basically the World Cup is a little different where you don't just kind of sign up because each country has to submit like
Yeah, you
their
get selected, right?
right. So there's tryouts for tournaments where it's like you're playing for your country, for example. Then there's always tryouts, most likely, right? Where it's basically like a mock, not really a tournament match, but basically everyone gets in a multiplayer lobby together, where like
Okay.
you all play the same song or same map at the same time, and
Yeah.
then we basically create a like mock map pool or like a tryout
Mhm.
map pool, we call it, where it basically sometimes you just copy one from an actual tournament, but it sort of it gives us a pretty good overview of like how everyone does on like different types of maps. And I think added on to the fact that like for the most part, if you're a good like if you're a top player, then you probably know most other top players or at least some. You sort of like have a little like you start to make friends with people. I think just naturally, just by the nature of the game. Um,
Right.
So there's definitely some team bonding, especially if like you're not really familiar with each other. Like you might play other games together. I
Mhm.
don't think most Osu players are really movie watchers, to be honest. um,
Oh no, Overwatch players aren't either. I make them watch I don't just make them watch movies. I make them watch like sports movies because at the very least it stays relevant.
oh, okay, I see.
No,
Yeah.
nobody in esports wants to go do other things. So that's such an audacious assumption, isn't
Right.
it?
Um, but yeah, there's definitely I think like some like team bonding aspect of it, but it's not necessarily something that needs to be forced because like just because the nature of how like most people generally already know each other if they're playing on a team together, they're already like pretty comfortable with each other. But there's definitely like bonding that you can do in like your team Discord server, for example. Like you just kind of like you end up chatting with each other and like I think one other thing about like since it's so I don't know. Actually, do you have any questions about that? Because I was going to change the topic.
um, I mean, questions about what in specific? There, it feels like you answered most of it.
Oh, okay, that's good. Then I think like one of the main differences again between like Osu and like most other games that are team like inherently team oriented is that like I think people can blame external factors for poor performance.
A
Um,
lot. Yep.
and
Coaching is the same no matter where you go, everybody.
oh no, but what, I mean in other games that's the case, but that doesn't really exist in Osu.
Oh,
Um,
okay. So you're saying it doesn't exist?
No,
Okay.
yeah, it does not exist in OSU. Like blaming external factors,
Really
because
interesting.
I mean, there's no team to blame. There's no
Mm-hmm.
um, like
You'd be
lack of
surprised
coordination.
the fucking excuses I've heard. Like I've had some players that they're just so frustrating to work with. Like they're like, oh, the weather is bad, so I'm feeling a little weird. Like you'd be surprised the fucking
The,
excuses people can come up with.
the
Listen, I was
radiation in
just
the
lagging,
atmosphere.
Whistle. Don't worry.
That's so true.
So
Okay, sorry.
no, you're good. But yeah, in OSU, um, it basically I don't know. It's very. I think I just okay. There's that aspect where like everyone sort of knows that like if they messed up, then like they just kind of gotta be better basically. Um, there's that aspect, and then I think also the fact that like there's no meta when it comes to Osu. I think that's sort of one of the appealing things as well, where um there's no like regular patches. There's no like right or wrong way to play necessarily. Um, there's no um early game, mid game, late game sort of concepts either. Um, it's very like um, y-
It's like linear, I guess, is what you're saying, right?
well, and like the objective is so linear that
Mm-hmm.
it's you're allowed to like no matter what um like you're allowed to use any method or technique you would like in order to achieve that goal of like just clicking the circles accurately.
Yeah.
um where I think like the most basic example would be like high DPI or mouse sensitivity versus like low
Mm-hmm.
DPI, um, where like if whichever one you're comfortable with, like just do that. That's a very common sort of like advice that people give throughout the OC community. Um,
Just kind of like do what like you want and like just do your best with it.
yeah, basically like
Makes sense.
as long as that option is what feels most comfortable for you, and you don't feel like
Mm-hmm.
switching it is gonna do you better, then that's probably the option that you should stick with.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, another simple example would be like the way that you click. So basically, you can click using your mouse buttons, obviously
And
just
your
clicking,
keyboard, right?
right? Or you can instead use there's like so you can either do left click, right click, which do the same thing, they just click, or you
Right.
can use your keyboard buttons instead. So you have two buttons to work with. Um,
Are there people who use both? Like who use like both mouse buttons and both keyboard
oh
buttons?
yeah. That's something too. So
Holy
you
shit, that's crazy.
basically use one finger on each hand. So it's they call it click X. So the default keyboard buttons are Z and X or Z and X.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so um, there's this play style called click X, where or tap X also, where you basically use one hand on X instead of like ZX. You do click and then X. Pretty self-explanatory actually, if I put it that way. But
Mm-hmm.
yes, someone in my chat also mentioned alternating or single tapping. So basically, like, do you
Oh yeah.
do you alternate each finger for every single circle, or do you most primarily use one finger and then only use the other one if it gets too fast? Basically,
Right.
um, all that sort of stuff is basically what people call preference. Yeah, there's a lot of preference, I guess, when it comes to
Mhm.
playing Osu, which is
Lot of freedom, since like
yeah, that's the
nothing that you
word.
do nobody's relying on you in the sense like in
Mhm.
Overwatch, like you've got to adapt to what your team is doing so often because everything they do is also relying on what you're doing. So
Right,
I can imagine how a game like Osu has a lot of freedom.
right.
Wow,
It's
God.
not only that, but like you have to adapt to your team, obviously, but you also have to kind of adapt to the meta. Like there's certain strategies that you might want to try, and you sometimes can't even try them because like your team will just say that you're trolling and like try to troll you back and be like, okay, this game is hopeless, like, and then they blame you for like trying to do something off meta or whatever. But in Osu, it's like if you see someone with a super unorthodox style, but they're getting better scores than you, then like you're just getting owned, to be honest. So
Oof, like fucking real.
I mean
Oh,
that's really what it comes down to. So
very true.
especially in tournaments. So
Yeah,
um
I definitely get that.
yeah.
I have so many questions from here. I guess I'll start with the easiest. Uh, what would you say is like the biggest difficulty of coaching Osu? Because I have like three different ones that I'll say, but I'll let you answer first. Like, what do you think is like the biggest struggle that a coach has when coaching Osu?
Oh, interesting. Nothing. I don't know if this is surprising or not, but nothing actually comes to mind necessarily. Um, there's always sort of a. I think this exists everywhere. Um, where there's like some people that are easier to work with than others. Um, or some people that sort of like they got a coaching session and then it sort of feels like they're just like they're the ones talking more than you, and it's like okay,
Hmm.
what's going on? But
Definitely.
um yeah, I'm not sure. I think like it yeah, nothing really comes to mind. I think
Mhm.
I feel like there should probably be a better answer for that, but
No,
um
I mean it makes sense. Like I'll say my answers and then
yeah,
I'll
yeah.
say why I think yours makes sense. Because like for me, there's three different like main types of coaching that one has to do to be a good Overwatch coach, and it's just because Overwatch is a team game, right?
Right.
So you have to do a lot of stuff. But really quick, I just kind of want to explain to chat because I know that probably not all of your people know fully what Overwatch is. Overwatch is a team game, but it's a very interesting team game because it's not like many others. Because here's the thing, right? It's probably only MOBAs really get even close. Like not even Rainbow Six or Valorant are remotely close to Overwatch because like the biggest thing that kind of define team games is how much the rounds of the game interlock with each other, right? And then how many plays you're making per round, right? So a game like Rainbow Six, you are making one play per round, but the rounds have nothing to do with each other, right? And the plays and therefore the plays have nothing to do with each other, right? And then you have other games like let's say like tennis, right? It's like super long rounds. However, it's not like there's like set plays. It's just like get through the round, be better than your opponent most of the time. Um, but like with Overwatch, you have long interconnecting rounds with many plays during them, right? Like rounds last 8 to 10 minutes per round, and you are making up to 10 to 11 plays during those rounds, and all of those plays interconnect, which is why Overwatch can be such a chaotic game to coach.
Oh,
But
interesting.
some of the biggest problems that I've ran into as an Overwatch coach is um, when it comes to team, right? Because team building is a huge thing. Like nothing is better than a team that knows they can rely on each other, right? Some of the best teams have been just frankly shitters, like people who like individually you wouldn't say are that amazing or like you've never heard of, but they just have played together for so long. Like there was a team that completely shocked everybody by dominating Open Division, which is like the main amateur tournament. They got third place. They had never played in a tournament before, I don't think. Um, and they played a completely off meta composition, right? Because Overwatch has a lot of characters, a lot of compositions,
Right.
completely off meta. But like what they had done is they would just play in low ranks and just play the same comp over and over and over, and they just got to know each other so well, and like they all agreed on how the game worked. And that's probably the hardest thing that like you have to do as a team coach for Overwatch is you have to like make the whole team agree on so many things and you have to bring them together, right? because it's one thing to make the team agree on how the game works, right? That's already a huge feat. It's another feat to make the players on the team like actually like each other, and it's a third thing entirely to be able to do both. I like every coach strives for that perfect middle ground, and there's always problems that come with it. I've only managed to achieve those middle grounds 3 or 4 times, and I've been coaching for 3 years, right? There's always something that isn't fully there when it comes to coaching a team, and it's a really difficult thing. Obviously teams can perform and get results without those, but getting that fully in a cohesive way is probably the biggest struggle that an Overwatch coach has when it comes to like team coaching. um as for individual coaching, oftentimes, like this is when I'm just doing like individual, like with one person trying to help their gameplay. Oftentimes it comes down to how accurate you are and how good you are at it, because there's a lot of problems that players have even up to the pro level, right? Overwatch is just too complex to say, oh, you only have one actual issue. There's going to be so many. So finding issues that are finding the issues that are the most important and going to cause the most improvement quickly, and also making sure that the player understands the fundamentals is really, really important, because you could see 4 or 5 problems, and one of those problems might make a player 5% better for fixing, another might make them 30-40% better, right? So not only pinpointing that problem, but delivering it in such a way that that problem gets fixed, like delivering the criticism. That is a big one that happens with Overwatch, in terms of like that, and then mental as well, because you're surrounded by a team as a big community. A lot of it can be toxic. You can't improve if you're not mentally sound. So mental coaching is a big thing a lot of people do, and that one is just the hardest part of that is just like calling people out on like their bad mentals and trying to make them not hate you for it, because that is a that is a thing that happens. Let me tell you, like you'll have this player on like a team or whatever, and they'll have this huge ego, right? And they will just like not be good for their teammates. They'll just not be helpful, and they'll be holding the team back, and like you try to confront them about it, and then they just fuck off, and they're like, oh, I hate this guy. So there's a lot that goes into it, but it's like I would say those are probably the biggest issues that like an Overwatch coach would face, and the reason that I don't think that like a lot of these things would happen in OSU, is because, like, first of all, there is no like correct way to play OSU. There's ways that work. With Overwatch, there's almost always like, especially when you're working with lower ranks, right? So people in this server, right, below high grandmaster, there's almost always like objective issues, right?
Right.
So it's kind of hard to find something that works for them. Either you get them to understand what's correct or you don't, and some people just don't do that. They don't want to understand, or they just don't. So like that's why, like, finding the best things to critique them on and how to critique it is a big problem, big struggle that Overwatch coaches would face, and I could see why that's not a thing in OSU. And kind of same thing for the team, right? Like each individual player's gameplay doesn't it doesn't affect each other's gameplay. It might affect the results, but it doesn't really affect each other's gameplay, right? So it's like you don't have those same team building struggles that you might have in a game like Overwatch. And then like mental is kind of one of those things. Mental is probably something I'm sure you do have to work with, because and anything you want to improve in, mentality is super important. So that might be something where you do have a similar struggle.
Yeah, I think just talking on the mental side of things, I think in OSU it's less about I think getting tilted is something that kind of affects your performance no matter what type of activity it is.
Mm-hmm.
But in OSU, a big component of nerves, or of like mindset is basically nerves and getting nervous.
For sure.
During performance, where I think that's probably,
I did that.
yeah, probably less the case in most other games where like, but the thing with OSU is like, since it's such a mechanical game, like when you get nervous, I don't know what part of evolution thought that this was a good idea, but like when you're feeling nervous, like your fine motor control just completely disappears.
Absolutely.
Like, and your hands get kind of clammy. I'm not
Fuck
sure.
evolution. It makes me bad at my video game.
Yeah, like I guess it's so sad. Like we weren't evolved to play OSU, I guess. But
that's the biggest tragedy of humanity.
yeah, kind of. yeah, evolution really messed up, but maybe later on in evolution will that glitch will get fixed. But
Yeah.
um, the that's such a problem with Osu basically since it's such a mechanical game that
Mhm.
like any small like discomfort in your hands basically or like lack of control will very easily
Mhm.
cause you to mess up, especially because like Osu more or less when you get to higher difficulties is like just like constant like performance after performance basically. Um,
Yeah.
like it's sort of hard to grasp at first if you watch like top players because like they're just kind of like flowing through everything, but
Mhm.
it's like so hard. It's I'm not really sure how to put this. It's maybe like first thing that comes to mind is like I don't know if you've tried like learning another language where it's just kind of like you see other native speakers that just sort of like flow through conversation like they just like everything comes out
Mhm.
naturally and then like if you ever try it it's like wait this is like actually
It's
impossible.
like it's like watching someone do a Rubik's cube and expecting to figure it out based
Oh
on that.
yeah, yeah, kind of like that. It's like you watch people just sort of like the amount of like internal processing that happens with people that are like very comfortable with like solving Rubik's cubes is
Mhm.
like sort of like hard to like you don't exactly know what you don't know when it comes to like watching
Right.
that which yeah, so basically my point with that is that like when you get nervous and your hands start to like start trolling you basically then
Mhm.
like um there's a lot of bad stuff that starts to happen with performance.
Yeah.
So
Actually, that leads me into another question. With such a performance-based game, um, I feel like there would be a lot of room for injury. I actually experienced this myself, where like there was like a spring break where I had like fucking nothing to do, so all I did was play Osu for fucking 2 weeks,
uh-huh.
and like what happened was like so I was focusing a lot on my grip and like getting a grip that would help me aim the best,
Right.
and that grip hurt my pinky a little bit. And after doing this for 2 weeks, I actually got like cubital tunnel, which is carpal tunnel, but for your pinky and your ring finger.
Oh, interesting.
Um, like I actually like my pinky and ring finger were asleep for a month, like pins and needles for a
Oh,
month.
holy crap, wow.
Is that something that's like kind of normal to happen, like where you're focusing so hard on your mechanics that you might not think about what a certain hand position or something like that would do, or is that just me being a fucking dumbass? Because it could totally be that.
It's very like since it's such a mechanically intensive game, overplaying is definitely something that um will result in very very bad things. Basically, what you described. Um, so yeah, I think at this point like
Chat's mad
there's
at me.
yeah the community is very like sort of aware of like how much of an issue that can be. Even like some top players will end up like going through things where they like will overplay for like some
Mhm.
period of time and like it will completely mess up their hands. So
Right.
yeah, no one is immune, but then obviously it's sort of like as you improve, basically, if you imagine like very strong like weightlifters, things like that. If you try lifting the same weight as them, obviously
Oh
you
yeah,
can't.
of course.
You're going to get injured, but then as you sort of improve, then you'll be able to do those things like with much more ease. So yeah, I think like allowing yourself to have like small gains sort of add up over time, like a little bit of practice regularly,
Hmm.
is definitely the way. I think also like a lot of the performance comes down to technique as well. Um, if you've ever gone like ice skating, skiing, roller skating, any sort of um, like what's the word? Like not mobility, but like basically vestibular like control,
Hmm.
those sorts of activities. Um, it's somewhat similar when it comes to technique and like sort of getting a feel for like coordinating everything together. Um,
Right.
yeah, I guess like coordination type activities. Um,
Hmm.
Osu is somewhat similar in that sense when it comes to technique, where there's this vicious cycle of doing something more, getting better at it, and having more fun with it. Where
Right.
um, when you're super new to something, then like you're not very good. It might be fun, but if you're not very good at something that you know what it looks like when you're good, then like that's probably not very fun either. Um,
Hmm.
but then obviously the more you do something and practice it, then you'll get better, and then the better you get, the more you'll have
Of
fun, and then the
course.
more you have fun, then the more you'll do it. But being able to break into that cycle is something that um, can be somewhat,
Absolutely.
especially if we talk about not just being a new player, but
Hmm.
working on a weakness that you have. Um,
Hmm.
it's so easy to neglect certain type of in OSU, for example, certain type of map, certain type of skill.
Mhm.
It's very easy to neglect those. If you are just sort of playing in single player mode, where basically you just pick whatever songs you want. That's the more traditional way to play the game, as opposed to tournaments. But yeah, obviously, like if you don't really
Can
care
I
about
can I
getting it,
interrupt you for just a second?
yeah, yeah, sure.
Because I see someone in chat has said like basically all you guys are saying is just play more. Got it. No. I wanna put a lid on that right now because there is a difference. You need to practice more. There is a huge difference between playing and practicing, right? This is something that I go over a lot with some of the lower ranked players in this server. Practicing is actually playing with intent, not just intent, oh, I'm just going to get better. What are you getting better at, right? So for Osu, do you want to focus on jumps, streams? Do you want more consistency, right? Do you want stamina, right? Practice more, right? Playing is like, I could hop on Osu right now and fucking just be like, ooh, funny circles. I like these songs. Let me play them, 5 times, and then, you know, I could do that every day and probably not get any better, right? It's practicing more. I just wanted to mention that because that's a huge thing that like that's it's really important to go over. Is like, you practice more. You don't just play more. You practice more.
Would you say quality over quantity is kind of what you're going
Um,
for there, or it's a
Quality
little
over
bit of both?
quantity, but you need quantity,
Gotcha.
unfortunately.
Gotcha.
Like, but a big thing as well is like you need it to be combined. So like think about it like working out, right? You know, if you did 100 reps over the course of a week, like 1 rep an hour for 4 days, like that's not going to help you at all,
Yeah.
right? But if you did those reps in like in the span of like an hour, 2 hours, like all 100, like that might actually build some muscle. So it's like if you only have limited time to improve, try to focus that time, right? So maybe spend 5-6 hours over the course of 2 or 3 days instead of 5-6 hours over an entire week.
Gotcha.
Yeah, being such a mechanical game, a lot of it definitely does come down to practice, and there's basically as a result, OSU has been around for maybe 15 years at this point. So, sort of over the course of time, as people marvel at the performances of top players and sort of wonder how they too can play to such a level, um, I think a lot of players fall into some traps of like trying to only just like gain more and more information about improving instead of actually putting it into
Yes,
practice.
that's so true. Oh, I'm sorry. That
Yeah.
is the spirit animal of the Overwatch community.
So,
Millions of players like, where do I play? What do I do? And I'm like, I mean, it'd be cool if you would like I've had players who like get coached once a day, like individual, like once a day every week, like for weeks on end. And I'm just like, how do you expect to apply any of this? So sorry, continue. That is so true.
right. So I think like with that in mind, I think especially being such a simple game where you have so much freedom when it comes to the way that you play, um, the majority of players in the community sort of like have collectively like the how do I put this? Like the collective viewpoint of the majority of the community is that like bro, it doesn't matter, just play the game. And so for that reason, the sort of phrase "play more" is one that you'll see somewhat backhandedly a lot in the OC community. Um, so and but then like for that reason, like that phrase has sort of created this connotation where like it doesn't necessarily get applied because it's like, okay, we'll play more of what, right? And then that sort of creates this whole cycle. And there's people out there obviously that sort of work on like giving more like actionable advice to stuff like that. Although interestingly, what I have found, um, don't tell anyone I said this, but
Right. We have 100 people watching, so
yeah, don't just yeah,
okay,
just
okay.
so
Shh.
just between you and me, but you definitely didn't hear it from me. But if someone's every now and then someone will ask for advice on something that really just comes down to practicing the game.
Yeah.
Um,
Yep.
and but if you say play more, then it sort of has such a connotation that like it's not really. It's like, oh man, another one of these guys. It's like not really answering my question.
Yeah. Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Oh, it sucks. It sucks so bad.
So don't tell anyone I said this, but if you just instead of saying play more, say practice a lot, all of a sudden, thank you so much.
Oh my god, that's so true.
I'll definitely get on that. And it's like, oh, yeah, no problem.
Yeah,
So
that actually brings me to like another question, if I'm not interrupting you.
yeah, no, I'm done.
So so one thing that I do here is I train some coaches, some coaches who've never actually coached before, right? I don't know if that's something you do or you partake in, but like, even just watching other coaches, what is something that like for OSU that you see a lot of young coaches don't do? Like what are some big mistakes that you see in some newer OSU coaches?
Good question. So I think my experience of like watching other people coach in OSU is very limited. I think a big part of that is because like um I think coaching in OSU is still like very emerging. It's sort of like fighting back the somewhat like prejudice or taboo-ness of like sort of like sort of in a similar vein to how sort of over the years people have collectively come like the community mindset is that like OSU is not that complicated of a game, and like as you practice it, obviously you'll get better, and like if nothing else, then like sort of figuring out your own way of improving is part of the fun of the game in the first place, since you have so much freedom. But yeah, so with that in mind, I think OSU coaching is still something that's like very emerging.
Mm-hmm.
But with that in mind, that actually reminds me of a similar topic that I I think I was like thinking of when you said something else earlier, where like you sort of have to consider the other players, like the person you're coaching. You have to consider their current experience level, and
Mm-hmm.
like don't overwhelm them with so many high level concepts that like don't apply to them yet.
Right.
Um, and like
Makes sense.
when you're like ripping apart their gameplay, for example, and I think this probably applies to any game, like
Mm-hmm.
you have to be careful not to like there's a saying for like basically like feeling like you're just sifting through sand, for lack of a better
Mm-hmm.
term, um or
Is it like learning style, like
splitting
not being too
hairs,
rough?
I think
Oh,
it's
splitting hairs. Splitting hairs.
yeah
Yeah,
yeah
that's
yeah
the one. Yep.
yeah. So yeah, you have to, I think the most important thing is to sort of focus on like the highest. Okay, I think the most important thing to be able to do as a coach, and this goes for anything, is like being able to identify the highest leverage information to give the other person,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to obviously. Okay, so for example, if you're coaching a bronze player, for example,
Mm-hmm.
um, they are making mistakes that are so like inherently wrong that like there's nothing to really coach sometimes, because like
Yep.
the entire course of their game is so flawed. Um, and so like
I just
you
tell
could,
people play 50 hours before you even try to get coaching.
right. I mean, it's like you could nitpick their like play by play decision making, but that's probably going to do them less good than like giving them a sort of overview of like game sense and game structure,
Right.
that sort of thing. But if you give that same advice to a grandmaster player, then you're kind of trolling.
They'll be like, you did not help me.
Yeah, it's just like why am I here? So
So kind of just knowing the level that they're
yeah,
working with.
yeah.
Interesting.
And you sort of have to be able to identify like based on their current level, and also based on their current level, and also based on like their goals of like what player they want to be. Like if they're bronze, but like they're very committed, like they have a 5-year plan that they're gonna like keep grinding the game, and they want to be like top 500 or something.
Mm-hmm.
Then I think it's okay to at least expose them to some higher level concepts, even if they don't apply
Oh, for
quite
sure.
yet. Um,
Mm-hmm.
while obviously still emphasizing on what they should focus on right now. But
Right.
um, yeah, if not, if they're just sort of like casual, maybe they just want to get to gold. Um, and I'm speaking in like most game rank terms.
Yeah, you're fine. Don't
And
worry.
I'll sort of as a side note, because I think this is kind of interesting with OSU, where OSU ranking is just a ladder in top 500, or like up there. You start talking about like your specific rank in the
Mm-hmm.
global rankings or server rankings. But in
Mm-hmm.
OSU, there it's just a ladder, and so like
Right.
your rank is just a number. There's no categorization, so um,
Mm-hmm.
you could be ranked like 100,000, and like that's the only way to identify yourself as far as like
Mm-hmm.
your rank. So um, and speaking of rank, I think I'll quickly touch on like how it works, because I think it also is, I think, something that's much more different than most other games that are competitive.
Definitely.
So in Osu, I mentioned there's tournaments, obviously, but then there's solo or single player mode, which is the most popular one, or the default way of playing. And so how ranking works is like based on the score that you got. There is basically an algorithm that calculates how hard that map is, and then it assigns that map a number from 1 to 10, pretty much, of difficulty, which are called stars. So 1-star map is basically very beginner, and then as you go up and
Isn't
up.
like the tutorial like above 1 star? Like how does the map even reach 1 star level? That was an actual question. That was just a thought.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I mean, 0 stars is basically not something that exists. There's maps that are like so simple. Like if you just have one circle and that's it, it's probably going to be 0 stars, or like 0.01. But yeah, so basically, depending on your performance and the sort of algorithm's perception of how hard that map is, then that it will assign that score a number from basically like a performance number of how well you did, basically from 1. This is separate from your score, by the way. Your score is like your combo and the accuracy and stuff like that, but then the performance value is basically what actually contributes to your rank. And it's a number somewhere in the hundreds, usually. If you're a new player, then it's under 100. And then I think the record right now is around 1100 or 1200, basically. Yeah, but basically all of your scores get, you have like a weighted average of all your scores of performance. So let's say you have one score that's like 110 points, and then another score that's 100 points. Let's say those are your only 2 scores, right? So it's weighted. So the second highest score you have is not going to give you 100% of the value. It's like
95, right?
Yep, it's 95%, and then it just like goes down and down. Basically to where like anything that's not in your top 100 scores is not going to give you anything, pretty much. So yeah, so like instead of 110 plus 100, it would be 110 plus 95, basically. And then it would just go down and down. And then like the sum of all those numbers is your total performance points value on your account. And then your rank is basically like your position of like how many points you have compared to everyone else in the world. So yeah, so
ranking in Osu is really cool.
Yeah, it's interesting. Even just that is interesting, but it gets, I think, even more interesting when tournaments go into play, because tournaments are just about, okay, the best way to put it, and this is a good way to conceptualize tournaments in probably anything, but in single player / like your actual ranking ability, you like what's valued the most is getting a high combo, pretty much, and performing well. But in a tournament, what's valued isn't actually performing well necessarily. All you have to do is get a better score than your opponent. And so if you are garbage at a map and your opponent is more garbage, you can probably still win on that map. And like, but basically, if both players are garbage at a map, then there's still going to be one winner and one loser, and also vice versa. So I think with that in mind, it gets kind of interesting, especially when like what's valued in the ranking system is not actually okay. So what's valued in the ranking system is based on the algorithm's perception of difficulty, and some like skills are sort of seen as like conventionally more difficult, like very high spacing or like very fast tapping, but things that are a bit more complex that get tested in tournaments aren't always seen as like very difficult through the algorithm or the difficulty calculation. So for that reason, like you could have a skill set that's very valuable in tournaments, where I talked about like more niche skill sets still having value, but at the same time you might not be super high rank in the actual rankings. So
yeah, because like score and performance points are different, is what you're saying.
Right. And so that if we were talking in maybe 2015, 2016, then that's basically the end of the conversation. But in tournaments, we use a separate scoring system that basically puts less emphasis on just combo, so that like tournaments aren't just decided basically by who got a higher combo, but like your general performance on the map, like accuracy basically. Because like let's say you mistimed every circle, but you still hit everything, then you would still get a really high combo. And in single player, that's what contributes the most to your score, like by far, because it's multiplicative. But in tournaments, we use a separate scoring system that basically weighs in your accuracy directly and like standardizes the score a little bit, so that combo basically isn't as important, but it's still like I think 70% of the total score is based on your combo. But anyway, the important point is that the tournament scoring system that's more standardized does not submit to your profile at all. So if you got a really good, like let's say there was a map in a tournament that was like really valued in the like difficulty in the performance system, and you got a really, really good score, the score would not actually submit to your profile at all.
Because it's online, right? Or is it just because
it's online, but it uses a separate scoring system that doesn't like the scoring system is only used for tournaments. It's basically like tournaments are played in custom mode, basically. Gotcha. So like if you do well, then like you don't actually gain any rank from it. So for that reason, there's like a huge, basically like polar oppositeness when it comes to single player and tournament gameplay. Another really big distinction between the two is that in single player, what really matters is like being able to play the highest star rating maps as possible. So like the highest mechanical difficulty, regardless of your diversity of skill set as a player. So if you're just really, really good at aim, for example, then you just play the highest star rating maps possible and you can get like really high performance point values of scores. But earlier we talked about having a linear skill set and how that can actually not be very valuable in tournaments. Especially, it can be valuable if your skill set's kind of unique, but if you have a very sort of generic skill set where it's just like, okay, you can aim really far, that's something that's really common basically, and like being able to tap really fast or having high stamina, for example, is also something that's like very generic. So there's players that are like very high rank in the solo ladders, but are not very like worthwhile tournament teammates, basically, or like very strong tournament players. So with that reason, there's even more discrepancy there when it comes to like the difference between solo and tournament gameplay, like as a player. And so for a while there was this problem where you could basically be really, really good at tournaments but have a very low single player rank. And so basically, so like tournaments, even in like most other games, they're sort of like there's like rank restricted or like rank locked tournaments where like the top of the top can't really compete there. But in same thing basically exists in OSU. Like basically, if your rank is under 10,000, for example, or under 1,000, which is still pretty high, right? But it's like the top of the top of the top can't compete there, right?
Yeah, makes sense. You know, give the little guys a chance.
right. But then what's up?
Do you mind wrapping this up, because we're running a little bit out of time, and this has been a very long tangent. I want to answer the question and then move on to one last one.
Oh yeah. But basically, there was this problem where what is it, like you could play only tournaments and get really good, but then like not rank up, and so you could sort of play in lower rank tournaments. But then that was basically fixed with the system where like when you win a tournament, then it sort of artificially increases your rank a little bit for seeding purposes. So
makes sense.
Yeah.
I mean, really, really cool to hear about like the competitive scene. So I'll kind of round us back to the question of like, what is the biggest problem that like I see lower level coaches doing? And for me, it's time management. Not like, not showing up to shit on time, but like to me, the first like between 5 and 15 minutes of any session that isn't like a scrim, right? Like if it's any type of VOD, which is what most of the primary coaching comes from, right? Scrim coaching is a lot more of just like, you push them, right? So you're just like, keep going, right? Like not good enough, right? That's all that is. But like actual reviews and stuff, the first 5 to 15 minutes decide everything, right? So many coaches will like so many coaches will like dance around stuff and like give a bunch of like random like niche, not really helpful advice in those first minutes. Like I'm pretty sure my record, I've actually started keeping track of it whenever I work with other coaches.
Like first minutes of the session?
but I keep a record of how long into a session it takes the coach to give a good critique, right? The record is 17 minutes. It took 17 minutes for one of these coaches to give a critique that was going to help the player in the long term, because they give so many niche, like, short-term things, right? The first 5-10 minutes are what matter the most, because that's going to be what starts you off, that's going to be what you end on, and that's going to be what everyone remembers, right? And another thing with time management is making the sessions too long, because it doesn't matter if you nail those first 15 minutes, right? If the session goes an hour, hour and a half, 2 hours, player's not going to remember like nearly anything, right? Like that's a big thing that I learned from like super top level coaches, like even some coaches who are now professional, is like they told me, like, stop doing 2-hour VODs with your team, once or twice a week. Do like 20-minute, 30-minute, 5, 6, 7 times a week, right? And same thing goes for individuals, right? The It's not about coaching them less. It's about making sure that you give them long-term information in sizable chunks, because long-term information is something that they should be, that should affect their gameplay for, most of their career, right? If you give that information, but you give too much of it, then, you just gave a bunch that they're not going to remember, right? And if you give a bunch of short-term information, it's going to help them for like a month at most. At most, sometimes it'll help the player for a week, right? So like, long-term information heavily reinforced in a shorter period of time is like the biggest thing that I think a lot of lower level coaches don't actually do, right? They try too hard to, fit a bunch of shit into these like time frames, and like try too hard to give small tips, when in actuality, as a coach, you're trying to have the biggest impact in the shortest amount of time so that the player has time to play and learn from everything you told them. So that would be like the biggest problem that I see with like lower ranked coaches.
Right. It's valuable to an extent to give information, but I think having actionable stuff that you can actually, like, the player can actually use for a very long time, especially you want to teach players principles, especially because
Yes.
the advice you might give them is only going to apply for so long sometimes. So
Mhm.
that's definitely something I focus on. And another thing when it comes to like being able to remember all the information, so usually when I do sessions, first of all, obviously you record it, right, and you send it to them.
Oh,
But
absolutely. If you can.
I usually have a notepad file that I like take notes on, basically just summarizing points that I made throughout the session, and then I'll send
Right.
it to them after so that they can just sort of like glance back at anything, mostly as a memory cue thing, but I assume that that probably helps as well. So
Yeah. Well, I guess we'll kind of round this off, is like, what do you think the two communities could learn from each other? Like, whether it be coaching, gameplay, methodology, any of that. What do you think, the OSU community could learn from Overwatch? And then I'll kind of give my take on what the Overwatch community could learn from OSU, and then we'll call it a day.
right, I think don't be so quick to shoot down an idea, basically.
Hmm.
Um, I think that that probably sounds somewhat generic, right? But I think when it comes to like off meta strategies, things like that, or
Hmm.
yeah. Oh, actually, I think that that's one thing, but probably the most important thing, especially from a coaching perspective, is to take ownership of your shortfalls
Hmm.
and be able to like own up to the fact that maybe you actually are making mistakes, and that's why you're at the rank that you're at. So yeah, I
Hmm.
think being open to the fact that, like, sure, it's a team game and like everyone else could be making mistakes as well, but like the better you are as an individual, then like
Hmm.
you can actually you can get much further than you think, right? So yeah.
Yeah. So wait, was that what OSU should learn from Overwatch,
No, no,
or
no. I think
what?
that's what Overwatch should learn from OSU, I guess.
Oh, I see. Okay. Well, we'll do it in reverse then.
Oh, okay.
No, it's fine. Um, I guess from OSU, what OSU could learn from Overwatch is that, like, OSU, it's something that we touched on earlier. It's like OSU is a very, it's linear in the sense of every time you practice is very similar, or like every time you
Yeah,
play is very
that's true.
similar, right? So it's like getting that separation between playing and practicing, right? Because with Overwatch, it's very easy. There's different game modes. You might even play different characters, right? You might, it's very easy to separate your mentality. But in a game like OSU, I don't think it is, especially somebody who's like tried to actually, improve an OSU at a time. I think that it's something that the OSU community should learn from Overwatch, is, finding that difference between playing and practicing.
Right.
Coming up with like concepts that you want to work on and really grinding out those concepts intentionally. Um, And yeah, I would say that's probably what the OSU community could learn from Overwatch, because that's a huge focus for us.
Right. Without overthinking though, and I think that probably applies to you guys as well.
Yes, definitely.
So there's yeah.
Really quickly, do you mind if I kind of drop the the server invite in the chat?
Go for it.
Yeah. So this is the invite for the gymnasium. This is the server we're actually doing this interview in. We do free coaching for Overwatch of any rank. We do one-on-ones, and we have a community. We do events like this. I could review a semi-pro player on here live. Everybody could be here. We also have a fundamentals series on the game going. We have quite a few things, and if you guys want to come in and join and be a part of it, it'd be really nice to have you guys.
Ooh, Overwatch coaching hub. Yep. And then so I guess those watching my stream probably know as well, but
if you want to plug, just like say it here, and I'll plug it in the video description.
Oh yeah. So our little like coaching hub is basically OSU University. This improvement focused. Yeah, I guess OSU hub, very active community, and obviously there's coaching there as well. But yeah, very supportive people, and yeah, I would suggest checking it out if you're interested in improvement related stuff, especially related to OSU. So yeah, I think that is largely it.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for coming on. It's been really nice to like learn about a different game and strategies, and it's really cool to hear how the micro works, because micro is like micro in Overwatch, you still have to relate it to macro, right? It's very rare that you do pure micro in Overwatch, so really, really cool, honestly.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me. I think that was a lot of fun, and hopefully those of you,
thanks for coming.
Thanks to anyone who listened to the very end, those of you listening to the recording, you guys are awesome.
Real ones.
Yep. And yeah, I think that is going to do it. Thanks again, Whistle, and everyone for listening.
Yeah, thank you. And if anybody in the VC who is still here has any questions, feel free to ask them now. All right, as they normally are, quite silent.
Smile.
Yeah. But yeah, thank you for joining us. You are free to go, my friend, unless you want to stay and hang around for a bit. We can do that.
Yeah, we'll see if anyone watching my stream has questions. Just I mean, I'll be streaming for a bit longer even after we leave, but yeah, Willie. Oh, but yeah, by the way, since we're done now, Willie, if you're still here, thanks for the raid, and for the 100 money.
I saw that, dude. That was fucking huge. Let's go, Willie.
Let's go. Yeah, Willie's a beast. He's also very in the world of like improvement related, or like just sort of discussing the game when it comes to OSU. So
is Willie a coach, or just Willie just like kind of do that?
I think he does do coaching. But yeah, I don't know if he's still here. He can answer. But yeah, he's a cool guy.
I was wondering if you were gonna acknowledge the raid, because that shit was huge.
Oh yeah, well I think for the sake of like the recording, it's sort of a little awkward.
Makes
but
sense.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was thinking of a question.
Yeah, sure.
I was wondering if something like, because a little bit before the player I'm currently working with, but I feel like I have came across quite a few players, especially as they are getting to like close to semi-pro level, where they have either like severe burnout or like confidence issues, one of the two, or a combination.
Mm-hmm.
And does that happen a lot in like every?
At least for Overwatch. I don't know if it happens for OSU, does it?
I think there's a big thing when it. Okay, I think confidence plays a really big role in like, I guess, much different ways. Yeah, and everything. But I think when you apply it to OSU, it's slightly different. The biggest things that come to mind are nerves for one, and also some players who like don't feel confident enough to challenge themselves on maps that are like a little outside. You have to be a little outside your comfort zone to improve. I think that goes with everything. But if you sort of don't have that confidence to push yourself, then you can end up sort of not improving as quickly as you potentially could. And yeah, but in general, I think when it comes to the like strictly performance aspect of the game with confidence, I think if you're not very confident, it can sort of lead to like not fully trusting yourself to like commit with the skill that you sort of have developed. So that can sort of there's definitely a lot of mindset when it comes to like having the confidence to really perform. And then again, as I mentioned, that applies to nerves as well. But yeah, I don't know if that completely answers your question.
No, it does. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and just from the Overwatch side, yes, that is one of the biggest skills that I've had to learn as a coach. Everyone's burnt out. Everyone's losing confidence because I'm gonna be real. All right, keep this on the DL. you 100 viewers, but the Path to Pro scene is awful. Like the community in the Path to Pro scene is terrible. So the higher you get, the worse it's going to be for people. So that's a big skill that you should learn as a coach. For Overwatch.
Right. Yeah, I think just sort of being sick of the grind is definitely something I've heard in a lot of other games. I think in Osu it doesn't quite work that way, just because like improvement really comes in the form of like sort of unlocking higher difficulty stuff that you couldn't play before, and so there's sort of always this sort of like reinforcement of like your practice sort of paying off. Whereas I think in some team games it's sort of like as you improve your rank, especially, then you get matched with like more skilled teammates that can sort of like own you in more unique ways. So, arguably lower elo is really how you get owned in unique ways. But yeah, regardless, I think sometimes like basically you sometimes get like screwed by matchmaking, or like the other team just kind of like, and the other team just sort of like generally working better together, combined with your own team maybe feeling like beat down by the fact that they died in like 1 minute, and then it's like, okay, this game's over. But yeah, I think like there's so many more uncontrollable factors that can lead to burnout in most team games. But yeah, I think is there a relationship between like burnout and confidence in that sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it feels like it at the very least.
Yeah. It's like burnout and confidence are very related, because oftentimes it's like burnout comes from feeling like you're no longer able to do what you previously were, right? And it feels like no matter how much work you put in, it feels like it's the same.
All right. Someone asked, I think focus is something that is common in any competitive game. Any tips on that?
Mm-hmm. I kind of typed this because I wasn't sure if we were gonna
Oh
mention
yeah.
But it's like it's a flow state, right? Flow state is basically it's a state of mind that you have to be in if you want to get like really good at anything, especially a sport of any type, whether it's esports or real sports. And it's basically like when your mind is only focused on the game, right? It's really good to be able to remove distractions, right? Here's the thing: flow stating happens when it's time to perform. That's a big thing. Practicing, it's really important to stay focused on what you're practicing on. However, you can't expect a flow state when you're practicing. You only should expect a flow state when you're trying to PB, right? When you're trying to get, a new high score, when you're trying to go crazy on a map or something, right? That's when you should be trying to flow state, which is basically remove all other distractions and focus your brain entirely on what's happening, and purely the game. But like a big problem that some people get into is they're like, oh, I don't feel as focused when I'm practicing versus when I'm playing. That's because they're two different mindsets. They're supposed to be like whenever you're actually try harding to get crazy scores versus like trying to improve. Those are supposed to be two different mindsets. You can't make them the same.
Yeah, I think that the term that we use, especially with more like skill-based mechanical stuff, is automaticity. I don't know if that's a term that rings a bell to you, but automaticity basically is like when you're able to like unconsciously perform a skill that you've practiced and learned.
Yeah. We don't use that term, but that's a big thing in Overwatch. Just practice something until you don't need to practice it to do it.
Right. And so I study psychology in school, and I think something I learned about automaticity, or this is basically what the theory is that when you're learning a skill for the first time, obviously you sort of have to like practice it very consciously. But then once you actually learn a skill, the theory is that it gets stored in a different part of your brain. And so it sort of like gets kind of accessed differently. I don't know if you know this, but your conscious brain is kind of really dumb.
There's actually like a number. It's like 8 bytes of information, like active information. And whenever you're playing a game that's like that takes a lot of focus, it's like 6 are already being used. That's the model I've heard.
Right. There's basically like your conscious brain and your unconscious brain, where your conscious brain is more for like, it's much more like, I guess, lazy and shortcut-y. And so it likes to cut corners a lot, basically, whereas your unconscious brain is like very sophisticated. But you can't really like control it consciously, obviously. That's why it's called unconscious. But yeah, with automaticity, it's more like, I think confidence is actually really important for focus, because if you're not, the less confident you are, the more you sort of feel like you have to take control consciously, which obviously for reasons that you now understand, that is definitely not ideal if you're trying
Right.
to perform consciously, because you're not really able to make use of like the actual skill that you've developed in like that unconscious part of your brain. You're not really able to fully make that you know manifest or show.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
yeah, confidence I think is really important with focus, because once doubts start getting into your head, then those can like be very, very intrusive.
Agreed. It's important to take breaks, everybody. That's a big thing. You can't, ask every pro esports player, and they'll tell you that if all you do is you get up and you play your sport or whatever every single day, the first thing you're going to do is get really, really unhealthy. You've got to take breaks if you want to have a good control over those parts of your mind.
Yep. I think breaks are definitely important for stuff like burnout.
Mhm.
It's definitely mentioned from a like mechanical perspective, like sort of allowing your brain to like get that skill like, patted down, for lack of a better term, giving yourself some time off from that activity. And that applies for any mechanical activity as well, just sort of taking a break
Yeah.
for maybe a couple days or like even a week or two, depending on
Mhm.
how much you've been practicing. An analogy that I like to use is like in Minecraft, if you're like if you go caving, then you have like all this iron ore, but like
Mhm.
you sort of have to like go back to base and let it all smelt
Right.
before you can actually use it. Um,
Mhm.
like you have to go caving, right? But then you also have to smelt it, basically. So there's two parts of it, and then you can actually like make use of all of it. Um, so yeah, that's sort of my analogy. There's a bunch of other theories that sort of come to a similar concept slash conclusion, but
Mhm.
um, yeah.
Yeah.
When it comes to what is it? When it comes to like giving yourself a break, is it something like? I guess my question is, are there okay? Is it should you always listen to your brain when it's telling you okay you need to stop, or are there situations where pushing that limit is important? That's
You
what I want.
have you have to push the limit to improve, but there's a limit and then there's a hard limit.
Gotcha. Okay.
Like, would you agree with that, Habib?
Yeah, I think we can somewhat relate it to exercise, where like obviously it's hard in the moment, and like if you're not challenging yourself, then your brain has no reason to actually implement any improvement, because at the end of the day your brain itself is also very lazy and like just wants to be efficient. So like if it doesn't need to spend energy improving at a task, then it's not going to. But if you're constantly putting yourself in a situation where your brain feels uncomfortable, your brain basically has two outs to get back to comfort. Either it stops doing that activity, which is obviously much faster, but it doesn't give you the improvement that you want, or if your brain notices that that option is not really possible because you're pushing through it, then your brain's like, okay, the only way I'm going to be able to feel comfortable here is if I actually improve at this activity. And so like having yourself feel slightly uncomfortable, to where like you almost want to get out. It's not quite like hurting you, like you're not having like genuine pain, but it's sort of like this like sort of feeling that of discomfort. Um, those are actually sort of ideal conditions for improvement. Even like I think another good word to use is like frustration. If you're feeling slightly frustrated, that's sort of your brain feeling like it sort of wants to get out. And it sort of opens up your brain to basically, if you've heard of like plasticity, brain plasticity, where your brain becomes basically more open to actually changing and improving. When you're feeling frustrated, that basically opens up that portal a lot more easily. And so if you keep practicing and pushing through when you're feeling slightly frustrated, then that helps a lot for improvement. Um, but aside from that, there's also the like genuine, like if you're like maybe exercising, you've been exercising really hard for a while, and then like you sort of feel like if I go really hard today, then I feel like I'm gonna lose a limb, basically. Maybe not that extreme when you're gaming, but if you feel some sort of like genuine pain sort of coming on, then your body can't really talk to you with words. It sort of talks to you like that. But I think if you're feeling some sort of like really bad fatigue, like physical fatigue, at least with like more mechanical stuff like Osu, or like genuine pain, then that's basically your brain sort of like banging on your door, like dude, stop, like whatever you're doing, stop, because otherwise bad things will happen. And like you have systems put in your body to make sure that that stuff doesn't happen. A simple example is like if you try turning your arm behind your back, at some point you can't really move it anymore, and that's because like if you did, you would break it. So it just like doesn't let you. So
I can break my arm. Watch me.
but yeah, I don't know. Hopefully that answers your question.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, God, I had a question, and I was gonna ask it towards the beginning, and then I forgot about it, and then I remembered, and I forgot about it again. And I'm pissed.
I feel that. I relate to that.
It was a good fucking question, dude. Yeah, I mean, I guess in that case that we're done. You know, if you wanna do any plugs, feel free, and yeah.
Sure. Well, I stream and I upload to YouTube, and I have a Twitter. You can find them all if you're listening through Discord. Then they're in my Discord profile, obviously. But yeah, hopefully. Oh, did your question have anything to do with like frustration, basically, or like fatigue? Whistle,
What question?
the one that you forgot.
Oh,
If you remember later, you can just DM me, I guess.
yeah, I'll probably DM it to you.
Okay, sure.
I'm not gonna lie. This is just like televised entertainment. Like this is me entertaining myself with this interview. Fucking just getting it public because this is super awesome.
Yeah, thanks again for inviting me.
Yeah, no, thanks for coming. Honestly, it's been
Yeah.
you've been really cool. You've been really great. You know, you've given some ideas on how we should do this in DM. So yeah, thank you very much for coming, and I will let you know whenever this gets uploaded to YouTube. Thank you very much.
Sounds good. I might upload it like right now, my perspective, but you're welcome to post yours as well.
All right, awesome.
And I'll be sure to put stuff in the description to plug things. But yeah, I will see you all around. Thanks for listening.
Yeah, thank you guys.